All right, so I think we're going to go at 1 second. Oh. All right, so it is 11 o'clock. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hello there. My name is Quentin Russell. I am the content marketing specialist here at Doc365, and today we're going to be going over how to avoid common vendor management problems. So, before we get started, let's take a look at what we'll be talking about today. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at who we are. So who is Doc365? What do we do? Why do we do what we do? After that, we'll launch into the webinar itself. We'll take a look at what common vendor management problems, so some of the more common ones. Then we'll take a look at the root causes of many of these common vendor management problems. So what causes them and how to identify them within your organization. Finally, we'll talk about how to overcome and prevent common vendor management problems in your organization. As part of that, we will also be taking a quick look at Doc365's vendor management / contract management solution. So I do want to let you know that we will be doing that ahead of time. Finally, at the end, we'll be doing a Q&A session with Doc365. So as part of that, I would ask that you post your questions in the chat throughout the webinar. So at the end, during that portion, I will take a look at the chat, and from there, I will answer any questions that you have. If there's anything I cannot answer, I will make sure to do the research, put everything together, and throw it in the email that I will be sending out later today that will also contain a recording of today's webinar. So with that said, who is Doc365? So we're a company located in Jacksonville, Florida. We have over 17 years of experience working with SharePoint and Office 365. Well, not Office 365, but Microsoft solutions, essentially, to deliver exceptional productivity solutions. We've worked with a wide range of companies in a variety of industries to implement a diverse array of SharePoint productivity tools. So these include intranet portals, contract management systems, CRM solutions, and more. We've done work with companies like King's Hawaiian Bread Company, Jack's Federal Credit Union. We do work with several United Ways and YMCAs. Our main mission is to break down knowledge silos and drive employee engagement and collaboration across your organization. Because oftentimes what happens is that if you're in operation for long enough and you keep your employees around for long enough, they tend to build up a substantial knowledge base, kind of an informal one that drives how they work and informs what they do. And depending on the organization, a lot of times they might not share that information. It might not cross their mind to do so. So what we really want to do is we want to provide tools and resources that you can use to really tap into those silos, bring them all together into one place, and provide essentially knowledge and expertise that your employees can use to do what they do, but better. So with that said, that kind of preamble out of the way, let's talk about what you guys are here for: vendor management, specifically common problems, how to identify them, and how to overcome them. So in our minds, there's about 4 major common vendor management problems. So these are outdated / missing vendor information, either vendor or organization non-compliance, slow turnaround times, and missed renewals and expirations. These can be major concerns for your organization, and they can cause damage to your bottom line. They can interrupt your ability to operate, and ultimately you just really want to be trying to avoid these, which is why you're here. So let's kind of take a look at these different problems and take a look at why they are issues. So outdated / missing vendor information. The thing is, unless you're spending every second of the day updating the information in whatever document center, library, repository that you're using to store your vendor information, it's eventually going to become stale. Your point of contact is going to change. They're going to move addresses. There's going to be shifts in the internal structure. They might get bought out by another organization, and you it shouldn't be on your organization to really keep track of that. I mean, it is important to do so, but it's not like you can be expected to keep up with every major change of every second of every day. And while if you are using high quality, communicative vendors, that might not be as much of an issue because they'll send that information out to you. You might not have access to those vendors. It might be out of your price range. There might be issues regarding that. So you might have vendors who it doesn't really, they don't update that information. They don't send it out to you. And suddenly, you're contacting the wrong person, which can slow down the process. You might even be sending invoices to the wrong place. There are just all sorts of issues that can come up that can cause breach of contract and essentially non-compliance, which, speaking of non-compliance, basically a company is non-compliant when they are either failing to adhere to a contract that they've entered into, or they are failing to adhere to any legal/regulatory standards. So these are state laws, federal laws, your OSHA, your any of your government agency, standards and regulations. So like, the FDA, if you are working with any biological matter and all of that. So essentially, these can cause major issues for your company. Basically, situations like, so if you're in breach of contract, that's a couple $100 fine right there. But depending on the size of the breach of contract, that can, the floor is hundreds of dollars, but the ceiling can be millions, depending on what you're working with, the scope of the work that you're doing, and the size of the contract that you have entered into. This can also be on money. This can also cause situations where you have to get a lawyer, contact attorneys, get that information, and essentially spend money on that, on arbitration, going to court, any sort of lawsuits. Those can be major issues. And it's not just your organization being out of compliance, but it's also the vendor being out of compliance. So they're not delivering what they've promised you, or they've missed a deadline, or they run into a situation where what they've sent you is below standard. So basically they've sent you a defective product. That's time. I mean, while that's not your fault, that's still time spent dealing with non-compliance in your organization, which can slow you down, prevent you from doing the things that you need to do, and ultimately potentially hurt your budget and prevent you from engaging in any larger, broader projects that you would want to, that can really help your organization grow. So yeah, trying to avoid this especially with your vendors, is important, because also if a vendor is non-compliant, you're not getting the resources and tools that you need to, do the work that you're doing. So that's definitely something to think about. Another common problem is slow turnaround. So this can include pretty much every stage of vendor management, from the actual procurement process, so figuring out which vendors you want to be using, negotiating the actual contract with the vendor, collecting important documentation from them, dealing with renewals and expirations. Basically, each stage of the process, either party, so either your organization or the vendor, having slow turnaround can definitely grind things to a halt, take something that should really only take like a month or two, and take that up to somewhere around 6-7 months, even a year. So like, especially with the whole procurement process, so scheduling demos, figuring out who you want to be working with. Basically, so you either have a situation where internally, you have people not sure of what they need to be doing. They don't know who's supposed to be attending what demo, actually scheduling all of those demos together to see, to actually show the people in your organization the tool and resource you're trying to use, moving things through the approval process. So essentially someone's supposed to sign off on this, someone's supposed to review this, but they're unable to, or they get to it like 2 weeks later. That can be a huge issue. You also have situations with, actually negotiating the contract. So getting the contract out to the vendor to sign, getting the contract from the vendor to sign, making changes, making edits, and again, going through that approval and renewal process, not renewal, but review process. So figuring out who's supposed to be doing what, making sure everyone's getting everything done on time and in a timely manner if there is no real hard deadline set up. And again, basically, this can just cause delay in important projects in your company. It can hurt your bottom line and keep you from implementing something that you needed to get done by quarter 2, and delay that out to quarter 3 or even quarter 4 or even the next year. Because, and that can cause major issues, or maybe not major issues, but it's definitely a setback that you really don't need to be facing. And then finally, the last kind of major issue that we're taking a look at is missed renewals and expirations. So this might seem like a very granular point, but it's essentially it's a micro look at a macro problem, which is a failure to track the actual vendor contracts. So actually track your vendors on, maintaining ongoing reporting and ensuring that you're up to date with all of your information. Because ideally, you should be reviewing your contracts as they're about to expire, basically 90 days out, 60 days out, and 30 days out. At 90 days, you should have it in the background of your mind. 60 days out, you should probably be beginning to plan next steps to see if you actually want to renew the contract, see if you want to continue working with that vendor, or potentially you want to expire. And then 30 days out, you should be taking a look at what steps you need to do, finalizing those steps, and ensuring that you are either canceling the vendor contract, so ceasing your partnership and moving on to someone else and beginning the next steps for procurement, or renewing everything, potentially negotiating and talking to the vendor to see if you can get a reduced price, because that's something because oftentimes if you've worked with someone for long enough, or if you've gotten a special deal the first time around, you could potentially negotiate with them just before about to expire to say, hey, we've worked with you for this long. Hey, we've done this with you. We've done all of these things. We've had a great partnership over the last year. How about extending our discount or giving us a new discount? Because if you miss that, you run into a situation where you just default to whatever their base terms are, and you risk losing out on money. You risk losing out on the ability to save money and potentially help your budget. So keeping track of these are important, especially because a lot of contract clauses, especially if you're using like software or any sort of service, they have an auto renew clause in their contract. So if you're a creative type company, say you are like graphic design or marketing, and you're using Adobe, like the Adobe suite. For those of you who don't know, the Adobe suite has an auto renew clause in its contract. Basically, every year you have about a 3 to 4 day window where you can cancel your Adobe contract without having to pay extra. Because if you try to cancel ahead of time, you have to pay out the rest of your contract. So basically, if you miss that small window and you find that you're not really enjoying the Adobe suite, you want to downgrade to another package, or you want to customize your package, because you can always go up with the Adobe suite. You can always buy more. They're always willing to do that. But to cut service or to reduce it, you really only have that couple day window without having to pay extra money and having them basically, reach into your pocket, pull out your wallet, and kind of slap you with it a bit. So, like personal grievances aside, that's basically standard practice. So if you really want to make sure that you're watching your budget, if you're getting the most out of your vendors and all of the tools that you're getting, you need to be tracking these things, because if you're not getting what you're paying for, then why continue to use the service? But the problem is if you're not tracking that, you can't stop using the service, and you're stuck with it for another year to 6 months, or 2 years, depending on the term length of your contract. So that said, what are the causes of these problems? Well, basically, these can kind of be tied back to 4 distinct issues. The first one is human error. That pretty much just speaks for itself. If you have any process that involves people, there's going to be mistakes that pop up. Unfortunately, to be human is to err. The next defined route is no defined process. So not having things written down, not having steps that people in your organization follow for procurement, for tracking vendors, and for the renewal/expiration. The next one is a lack of reporting. We kind of talked about this a bit when we were talking about expirations and renewals, but essentially not reporting on the important vendor information that you need to be keeping track of. And then finally, having outdated tools or processes. So essentially, you're using a tool that worked 10 years ago, but isn't doing so hot now. Maybe it's got slow loading times. Maybe it still requires you to have physical documentation. You're having to print things out. You're having to switch over to email and jump to a bunch of different platforms. And that can slow you down and cause issues to pop up in the process. So let's take a look at these real quick. So human error. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. Regular human error generally accounts for most of the issues that pop up in the vendor management process. So essentially, people fail to do their work, they lose documents, they forget to pass on information, some notification to take a look at a vendor document, or to review something or to sign off on something sits in their email inbox and it languishes there for 2 to 3 weeks. And suddenly you're behind 2 to 3 weeks when you really wanted to get this done within a month. You also have spelling mistakes, issues in the contract itself. If you're having to manually generate contracts every time and having to sign off on everything, you run into issues on the other side with vendors. So potentially giving them access to information if you're trying to do things from within something like a vendor portal. So maybe the person who set up the walled garden didn't exactly do it right, and suddenly your vendor has access to information from other vendors. Tiny, simple errors can cause major issues and potentially risk you becoming non-compliant, which means you're having to pay hundreds to thousands of dollars because someone made a slight mistake. So basically, trying to eliminate this, trying to cut out as much of the human element as possible is probably your best bet for vendor management. But we'll kind of touch on that in a bit. So the next part is not having a defined process. This pretty much is, again, it's self-explanatory. If you don't have things written down, if people don't know what part they're supposed to play in the process, nothing's really going to get done, or it's going to get done really slowly. Or a metaphor I really like to use is that it's basically a play. That's all. I mean, with everything, with every part of the business process, it's a play. Everyone needs to know their part. People need to learn their lines. They need to learn their stage directions. They need to know what goes when things are supposed to happen, so that everything can move smoothly. So if someone doesn't know who they're supposed to send the document to, if someone doesn't know that they're supposed to be checking on, when something's about to expire, when something is about to renew, when someone doesn't know what the next steps are if they do want to expire, because all of this isn't written down and it's all informal or stored away in someone's brain, well, that person's out sick, they forget, something goes wrong. Suddenly your whole vendor management process is in disarray, and suddenly you're finding yourself non-compliant. And again, paying out fees of hundreds to thousands of dollars. So realistically, making sure that you get all of that written down, build that out, that can really help. But again, we'll touch on that in a bit. Next up is a lack of reporting. So like I said, you need to be tracking and reporting on what's going on with your vendor contracts. So basically pulling out the obligations, seeing if the other side is doing what they're supposed to be doing, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, if there are any tasks your organization is supposed to perform, making sure that those are assigned out. Again, if there are tasks that the vendor is supposed to do, making sure those are built out and assigned to them. Furthermore, tracking important dates in a contract's life cycle. So essentially deadlines, when it's going to renew, when it's going to expire, what the actual terms of the contract are for renewal and expiration, what the actual terms are for communication. All of these are important to keep track of. All of these are important to be monitoring on a consistent basis. And while you shouldn't do it on a day-to-day basis, spend every hour of every day doing it, definitely take, have someone dedicate some time out of their week to take a look at this, or, find a way to integrate it into your day-to-day activities. Which, we'll kind of touch on how you can really do that coming up. After that, finally, having outdated tools. If you're using outdated tools and processes, it's going to have issues come up. If you're still storing things in filing cabinets, that can be an issue. Unless you're doing so for regulatory reasons, then yes, keep storing them physically. But if there is no regulatory / legal reason for you to be storing physical versions of documents, don't really do it. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of effort. Also, having an outdated system, doing everything through email, doing everything just over the phone or through IM chat. Again, it's slow, it's clunky, it opens things up to error. Really, you should be trying to centralize everything into one tool that can kind of automate a lot of the processes and take control of everything so you don't really have to be monitoring this. So, with that said, here's 3 big ways that you can really overcome and prevent a lot of your vendor management problems. And again, we've kind of touched on all of these throughout the webinar so far. First of all, you need to codify your processes. Write everything out. Find a way to get everything enshrined into either a system or in a document somewhere so everyone knows what they need to be doing. And then make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. Distribute it. Give people access to it. Or if it's a tool, just let them know that the tool is going to do it for them. Second up, automation. Automate, automate, automate. I know a lot of people are kind of scared of automation. It's a big buzzword going on right now. But essentially, the more you can take the human element out, the more you can get rid of human error, which is one of the biggest vendor management problems. And then finally, you want to get new tools, which can be a pretty sizable investment depending on what you're doing. But a lot of times you can find a vendor management system that also doubles up as a contract management system. For instance, here at Doc, our contract management system also has a vendor management system built into it, which also offers a an external vendor portal that can help out with a lot of the problems. But we'll take a look at that after we take a look at kind of dive into these 3 topics more in depth. So, first of all, codifying your processes. Write it out. Define everything. Literally every single granular stage. Who needs to be doing what they need to be doing, when they need to be doing it. Write that out. Define it. Make sure everyone knows what they need to be doing. Otherwise, you're going to make mistakes. Problems are going to come up. You're going to run into a situation where things get disorganized again. So essentially, just take the time, write it out, build everything, distribute it to people, and make sure people know what they need to be doing. It shouldn't be that hard unless you're a larger, multinational organization. Your procurement and vendor management process isn't going to be too complicated, but just having it written out, having something to refer back to is not only good for smoothing out the process, but say you have someone new come in. You hire a new employee, you bring in an outside consultant, you go with another organization, having that codified process essentially ensures a smooth transition into whatever new step of the process, whatever new way you're deciding to approach the process is. Next up is automation. Basically, like I said, it eliminates a lot of the issues pertaining to reporting and human error. By having a system take over, you can ensure that deadlines aren't missed because it's going to let you know and notify you when things come up. It's going to make sure that you're tracking important dates. It's making sure that your system and process is smooth and consistent because people get notified when they're supposed to be doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. It also tracks everything in that system. So if someone does do something wrong, if human error does creep in, you can identify it and eliminate it, whether that's through training that person, moving them over to new responsibilities, whatever it is you decide to do to rectify that situation, the system will at least allow you to identify and hold the process accountable, hold the people involved in the process accountable for the work that they need to be doing and for how they're supposed to be doing it. Then finally, taking a look at new tools. So essentially, dedicated vendor management tools have evolved and grown vastly over the last several years. By using one of these, you can essentially build out and define and automate your entire vendor management process within there. So instead of having to have that written out document, having to take time to write everything down and, break everything out, well, I'd still recommend doing that kind of on a macro scale, but you don't have to do it on a micro if you have the system, because the system kind of takes over and does everything for you. And the best part is that a lot of tools can basically be built on top of what you're already doing. So if you already have SharePoint and Office 365, there are organizations out there that actually build contract and vendor management out on top of that. For instance, like us here at Doc 365, we do that. All of our solutions are built on Office 365 using your tenant. So basically, people aren't going to have to learn a new system. They're not going to have to learn how to use a whole new thing and, jump from platform to platform. Instead, say if you were to go with like Doc365's vendor management system, you still have access to all of the security of Microsoft, all their secure cloud servers. You still have your single sign-on. You still have your two-factor authentication. It's just taking, and you still have the system that people in your organization know how to use, but it's now been modified with expanded functionality so that you can actually track your vendor contracts and even your customer contracts. Speaking of that, to kind of show you what you should be looking at, what you should be looking for. So let's jump into here. Nope, that is the wrong system. One second. There we go. I was on the wrong screen. So everyone should be able to see my screen now. So this is our unified contract vendor management system. So right now we're really going to focus on the actual vendor management side of things. So say you have a request for a vendor come in. Building that out is pretty simple. So what happens is that someone comes in here and they say, I want to build out a contract. So what they do is they fill out all of this information. They define what it's for. So whether they want to work with a vendor or whether they're working with a customer. So they fill out all of these fields, which are not predefined. So during deployment, we'd work with your company to really build these out and set these up. But essentially, they'd fill out all of these forms. So they'd be guided through the process. And then once they did that, you would then be able to, actually, you know what, we're just going to do it right now. So you'd be able to come in here and you'd say, okay, I want to do vendor 5. Then you'd say what department it's for. So you'd say, or you'd fill out all of these fields. So depending on what field you want to have, you'd be able to come in here and just set those up. People would then come in, fill out the drop downs, type in what they needed to type in, select who they're working with, what type it is, all of that. Dates, who it's assigned to. And then what you do is, so you'd build that out. And then from the request itself, you would then be able to create the contract. So instead of having to type everything out, copy things over, build a whole new thing from scratch, you can just come in here and say, okay, well, we're going to build out a statement of work. We're going to make sure all of this information is filled out. So depending on the contracts you have in your organization, you'll be able to set up document templates for the contracts that essentially so from this system, it would auto populate onto those forms. So you'd fill out all of this information, make sure it's all defined properly, save it. And then what would happen? Oh, I have to make sure to fill out the actual effective date. So from there, it's going to actually, like I said, auto-populate the document. So instead of having to build everything from scratch, it's going to save you time and effort because you're not going to have to go search through everything. You're not going to have to find the right thing. Instead, it just builds out and fills out the document for you. So as you can see right here, it's the full contract, which you can preview here. And then you have access to Word's full editing and revision policies. So you have access to redlining, you have versioning control, you can track all of that information. So then from there, you can just jump to the actual contract itself and keep track of everything. So since this is a vendor, you need to walk people through the approval process. So you've generated the contract or they've sent it over to you and you want to make sure it's approved. So what you'll do is you'll just come in here and you'll say, okay, this is the process that we want to do. So this is procurement. So these are the people who are supposed to sign off on this. It will, and then you select next steps. So once they've approved it, it'll then go to this department, it'll go to this person, and then it'll go to this department and go to this person, and they're supposed to approve it and sign off on it and leave any comments. From there, you can just fire the workflow and bam, it goes through the process. Because we are logged in as Joe Joseph, we are then able to just approve, reject, or say that we need more info. So we approve it, and then it'll fire off the next stage of the process. So it'll say, okay, it goes on to marketing department. Because we are Joe Joseph, again, we can just approve. And then finally, it'll fire off and go to the next stage, which is goes off to legal because we have set this up so it goes off on a separate day. So tomorrow, this email account for Joe Joseph would get a notification saying to come in, review it, and approve it. You can also track all of the obligations. So whether they are due to your organization, whether someone in your organization needs to complete them, or you can create these and assign them out to the vendors themselves. Furthermore, you can actually take a look at the actual associated contracts, see all of the history of it. So again, getting that accountability that I was talking about and the notifications. So saying when they're supposed to be doing separate things, when people are supposed to be tracking different things that they're supposed to be doing. Going to the actual dashboard itself, you can keep track of all of the expiring contracts in your system. So saying when, 30, 60, 90. So again, like I was saying, making sure you can track all of that so you can review, take a look at next steps, and then finalize those next steps. Taking a look at the actual party themselves, one thing that a lot of people think about when it comes to reporting is actually keeping track of the vendor information and whether or not you want to continue working with them. So you can actually, our vendor management system allows you to build out these vendor scorecards. So you can customize these and set them up so that you can grade the different vendors that you're working with. You can also do these with the contract side of things. So everything that works with the vendors also works with the contract side. So taking a look at these, you can build these out, send these off to the vendors using our external vendor portal, and then have them basically fill out that information, or you can fill it out internally so you can keep track and determine whether you want to continue working with them. So jumping over to the actual vendor portal, it looks much the same. However, this is an external site built out for the actual vendors. So what you do is you would give them the login information, and then they would be able to come into here and fill out their information. So these are everything that the vendor would see here is only pertains to them. So it's a walled garden where they can only see their side of things, and so they can see any of the contracts that they're working on with your company. They can see all of the documents that they're working on with your company. They're seeing any questionnaires that you've built out and sent over to them, but it's only for their company. So for instance, they can also build out and update their profile. So if they have any changes that go on in their organization, you can basically put it on them to make those changes. So as opposed to having to take time to track down the information, you just say, hey, you'd send them out a notification every once in a while. Just say, hey, make sure you're filling this out. Make sure you're keeping this updated. And it's like the same thing with the contacts, so they can just add contacts pretty easily, so you can know the point of contact that you're supposed to have within their organization without having to take time on your end to do so. These are the different questionnaires that they're supposed to fill out. So if you have any documents they need to fill out, so due diligence, their safety certifications, any forms that they need to or documentation that you need to have that they need to fill out, you can build them out and submit them through here to make sure that they get them done. And so that you have that accountability. And again, they only have access to their end. So they can only see what you allow them to see, and they don't have access to information from any other company. So with that said, that's just a brief overview of our contract and vendor management system. If you want to learn more, if you want to take a closer look at that and potentially explore how it can benefit your organization, feel free to sign up for a free demo on our website. There will also be a form at the bottom of the page when I send you the recording later today, so you can fill that out, sign up for a free 30 to 45-minute demo. We'll explore how our solution can help your company, see what next steps are, and look into building that out in your SharePoint tenant. So that said, does anyone have any questions? If you do, feel free to type them out in the chat right now. I do also want to take some time to talk about our upcoming webinars. So we do a webinar each month. It's completely free, same time every week. So Tuesdays at 11 a.m. So next week, we'll be talking about how artificial intelligence is set to revolutionize contract lifecycle management. On the 23rd, we'll talk about important employee data you should be tracking. On April 6th, we'll be taking a look at why vendor compliance is necessary for business success. And then on April 13th, which is the second Tuesday of the month, we'll be doing the next part of our SharePoint Basics series, And this time we'll be talking about metadata. So we do offer our SharePoint Basics series every second Tuesday of the month. This is basically us trying to break down a lot of the more complicated and expansive SharePoint topics and make them more digestible for the average user. So that said, if no one has any questions, I think that that's all for now. If you have any more questions and wish to contact us, make sure to call us at either 904-309-9970, or you can email us at info@mydoc365.com. If you have any personal questions, so for instance, you have any more questions about vendor management or you have questions about SharePoint, feel free to reach out to me at qrussell@mydoc365.com. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn at doc365. So with that said, this has been Quentin Russell with Doc365. And I thank you so much for coming out to this webinar. Have a great day.